G'day folks and welcome to this overview of Downfall, Conquest of the Third Reich. I have set up the game, it is all ready to go, pretty much, and I wanted to give sort of a look at what you're looking at here. There are so many different components to this game. I mentioned in my unboxing that it at a glance seems similar to the Battle for Germany, an old SBI/Decision Games game. But once you begin to unpack the details, there are so many different elements that interact in this game that give it a very unique feel. And you can see all those elements spread around the map. So I kind of wanted to go through, this won't be sort of a learn to play type of game, rather it'll be kind of a what are you looking at when you look at this map? What are the various components that will come into gameplay? We'll start off with hexes. It's a hex-to-hex based game. You will notice different terrain features. So you've got the hills, the mountains. These effects of this terrain is weather dependent. So for example, in snow turns, mountain hexes are difficult. They are, I think it's impossible for armored units to move into and out of. It's difficult to draw supply through those. In mud, weather turns. The same applies to swamp hexes. They become difficult. And the weather changes, or it may change over the course of a turn based on the weather marker, which is way up the top here. You can see the current weather here. Once that weather marker reaches weather 2, the weather may change based on the turn. You look at the turn, the weather will move to the second weather effect. On the first turn, it's snow. So once that weather marker moves, we'll say it's snow. But on subsequent turns, you can see here, turn 5 here, we start off fair. Once that first weather marker is hit, it becomes mud and swamps will become difficult terrain. Then, once the third weather marker is hit way up in the top right, we revert to weather condition 3, which is fair. So the weather changes based on that weather marker. Conditions on the map change based on, yeah, the weather in play. What else? Okay, so there are rail lines across the map, and initially I didn't really notice this, but these are important for various game effects, but they can also sort of mitigate the difficult terrain. If you can draw, there's an example in the rulebook of Casino down here, which is mountain, but you can draw, you can use those roads to effectively negate the difficult terrain effects. You will also note, and it's again difficult to see at a glance, but looking carefully, you'll note the national borders. So here's Hungary around here, you've got Croatia, Serbia, and these national borders have a key effect on what, on whether or not you can actually move into a nation. So if the Soviets, for example, have an army in Hungary, the Western forces are not allowed to move into Hungary unless there are Germans there. So if there are no Germans in Hungary, the Soviets occupy Hungary, Western forces are not allowed to then move into Hungary. They have sort of occupied Hungary, claimed it, they've told the Western forces to stay out, and the Western forces must adhere to, to that kind of demand unless there are Germans in Hungary. If the Germans are still fighting the Soviets in Hungary, then the Western forces can come along, move into Hungary, and that could be important, the timing of that, because if there are Soviets and Western forces within a national border, they are both allowed to continue staying there in effect and moving through that national border. What else can we talk about? There's a lot of restricted hex size, a lot of restricted movement. So along the Caucasus here, there's impassable. You can't obviously move across the Adriatic Sea, for example, things like that. It's all pretty obvious things to consider. You will notice along the eastern front, we have this dotted red line. This is the campaign front line. There's a dotted black line. That's the campaign front line. This is where you'll notice Soviets and OKH forces are divided. There's also a dotted red line, and that's for the Husky scenario. Then there's also the Overlord scenario as well. Here's the Overlord line all the way back here. It's more difficult to see. So that's a quick visual indicator of where the front line is for those scenarios. There are sea areas. Sea areas are really interesting. Another kind of thematic creation to wrap your head around. You'll notice, for example, down here in the central Mediterranean Sea, we have 3 Italian fleets and 2 British fleets. And this is really interesting. So the number of Italian fleets is driven by the Siege of Malta strategic track. It starts here, which means that there are 3 Italian fleets on the board, 1, 2, 3 in the central Med, and there is a 0 Western naval strength modifier. If the Soviet player, in effect, can bring this towards an Axis advantage, they may get another Italian fleet with a negative Western naval strength modifier. If the Western forces can pull this back towards their side, they reduce the number of Italian fleets, they increase their naval strength modifier, makes things a lot easier for them. Up in the Battle of Atlantic, you'll notice, up in the North Atlantic here, 3 German submarines with a mixed American-British fleet, US-British fleet. Similar rules with this track here. The more the Germans or the Soviets, the OKW forces can shift that marker to the right, the small submarines they can deploy, the greater the Western naval strength modifier, starting on -2. It's more difficult for the Allies to gain their advantage and to reduce the number of submarines. Finally, the strategic bombing track up there determines the type of US air units on the board, the number and the type. So you'll notice there's a couple of aircraft on that track. As it moves to the left, the Allied forces, the Western forces, will be able to deploy their elite units with a range of 5 and that elite unit marker, and they remove a non-elite unit from the board. So they become, the air units become stronger. Air units, you may notice a few on the board here. Where else are they? There's one here, there's one in North Africa, down here in Benghazi. And yeah, they have a range. They influence air superiority for combat, giving you modifiers. They can't be destroyed. They just basically redeploy if the hex they're in is captured. Fairly easy to track, and yeah, really interesting. We have along the left here the objective track. And this basically tells you all the different red objectives on the map and who controls them. Those that are blank at the start are controlled by Germany, a whole mass of them, either OKW or OKH. And those with the green marker, usually on the left here, are controlled by Western forces. Those on the far right, behind this little thing, are controlled by the Soviets at start. And I think that includes Moscow. That's interesting. There are Stalingrad, Grozny. Should they have another one for Stalingrad? No, they don't control Stalingrad yet. Technically, the Germans have marginal control of Stalingrad for now. Okay, what else? So as these become conquered, they'll fill up with control markers. To the right here is the victory track, leaning 1 point towards the Western powers. This also tracks their armor reserves and transport points. We have the turn track. I've mentioned it in the unboxing. There are 8 turns. Each turn represents roughly 4 months of warfare. And the turn ends when the weather marker advances beyond 91. I think that's the trigger. And what that basically means is that all 4 of the forces, all 4 of the powers have advanced beyond 91, because the weather marker will follow them up, trailing behind those 4 markers. And then, what else? Then we have, that's the initiative track around the outside there. It'll trigger events. So when a player moves past their event marker, they'll trigger an event. Incidentally, the 3 events in play here. So I mentioned this is the discard box. This is the current event, and this is the pending event. It'll come out next. This also determines air forces on the map. So you'll notice there's 1 American, 2 Soviet air forces. Where are they? Oh yeah, they're both here. And then we start, now I haven't fully set this up yet, but we start with this 1 OKW air unit. Where was that? where did I want it to be? I wanted it to be somewhere around there, I think, on that rail line. I think that's incomplete. Haven't quite finished that one remaining step. And in fact, I've got some action cards to do as well, so I haven't fully set up, but that's where we are. Okay, this is the action track, and this holds the 10 order markers. So basically, the setup dictates that you pre-populate this cup with a number of orders, and then you draw 10 out. So the Soviets will go first. You'll notice the Soviet initiative marker is on the far left of that initiative track. They will go first. They will have the option of basically their markers that have come out, which is recruit or partisan warfare. Or a card from their starting action card hand, which they haven't drawn yet. When they pick one of these markers, they'll put the marker on the corresponding orders track, pay the cost. So partisan, if they pick partisan warfare, it costs 7 initiative points. They'll put that over there. Their initiative marker will go up 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They'll be just short of that event. Although if they pick recruit, they'll bump up 16. They'll get an event, which will give them an arm and reinforcement by the look of it. And yeah, they perform the action. And that's how the game works. Then it'll be the Western powers. The Americans will go. That will be replaced, and the Americans at present have a choice of 3. This is quite a flexible one. It gives them a choice of operations to perform. They've also got the recruit action, and they've got a strong redeploy action there with no combat. In addition to those actions, there are also these planning actions. So you can, when you take an action, you can put it in the planning box here for 1 initiative point. You move your marker up 1 space. And this means that you can perform this action later on. So the Germans, the OKH, start with a redeploy action in their planning. The Americans start with a really combat action in their planning phase, and they can use this later on. The Soviets have another combat action, which they could draw upon, and the OKW forces have the mechanized action. Okay, so that's the action track. Some of these are also two-sided. So I mentioned recruit, it's mechanized on the reverse side as well. And when you take those orders, as I said, you put them in the orders display and they're unavailable for the rest of the turn. I believe these all go back into the orders cup for drawing at the end of that turn. You will also notice both sides have a force pool. So here's the Soviet and OKW force pool. Here's the Western forces and the OKH force pool. And they'll be basically available for placement on the map when an order or action or event allows you to do so. There are also, there's a pending area way up the top up here. And is basically where your reinforcements go until the high command card makes those forces available. I believe that's how that works. What else do we have? A big area for markers that may come out, isolated, out of supply, heap of control markers, some possible air units, the jet markers that the Germans may get via play of an event. Down here is basically an optional combat track that you can use. So basically you work out what column you're using. You say, okay, we've got a modifier of 3, positive or negative. Let's say 3 positive. Then you work out the dice roll modifier, and you've got a +4 dice roll modifier. So now you're using column 3, +4. You don't have to use this, but it makes it easier when you're doing a lot of those calculations for combat. Nice little trick to use as well. Event card display I've kind of already covered. The weather card box is here, shows the current weather out of 3 possible options. So snow turn, summarizes all the effects of that. I think it's double-sided, but the same effect on each side. Yep, mud and fair weather. So that goes down there. I've got a map key down here, summarizing the various terrain effects. What else? Weather card box, and that's it. Yeah, so I am playing two-handed. All right, so I've got basically one player is playing the Soviets, and the easiest way to distinguish, well, they're red and the dark grey. So the Soviets will control the Eastern Front Soviets and the Western Front OKW, Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. All their forces that they control have a white text and a white box. So white box. What else? The Italian forces down here, the garrison forces, through here, Vichy France, all these sort of forces along the front, the fortress troops and so forth. North Africa down here, white box, okay? Conversely, the Western forces control everything with the black text and box. So black text and box and so forth. Where else can we look? We can see, yep, some forces there, even the fleets. Okay, so, and then all the OKH forces on the Eastern Front. Black text and box, Romania, Bulgarians, the fleet. Okay, so black sort of text and box icon fleet versus a white Soviet fleet controlled by the Soviet player. That's an easy way to distinguish if you kind of pick up a random force. So who controls the Vichy French? Well, it's white. Who controls these Bulgarians? Well, it's a white text box, so it's controlled by the Soviet OKW player, basically. A couple of different types of forces. You've got leg units, which are the most common. They're everywhere. You've got motorized infantry. I'm sure there are some of those around. I did see them. Yeah, motorized Soviet infantry, mechanized. Oops, got to be careful. So that's my concern. Accidentally flip a unit, it suddenly becomes something different. Accidentally rotate a unit, and suddenly they're gaining strength. You indicate the strength of a unit by rotating them. 4 pips is, how does it work? I think 4 pips was an army. Maybe it was, yeah, 4 pips was an army, and I think it was corps. Was 2 pips a division, or am I getting too large? It's around about that. Obviously, there'll be differences. So maybe 3 pips is a German army. Yeah, roughly. It really doesn't matter. You're really counting pips. That's what's important. There are also fortresses. So you've got a fortress in Leningrad. You've got a fortress in Moscow as well. And then you've got these troops here who I think they're called the Festung. I don't know what the literal translation is, but they're basically fortress troops, defensive troops. Yeah, and you have some garrison troops as well. What else? Various factions. So look, the different minor powers can stack together. The particular issue around here, you've got some, what have you got? Hungarians, you've got Italians, you've got Romanians, you've got Germans, all crammed in there on the western side of Stalingrad. You will notice as well conscript troops who do not perform very well, the little triangle, and then you've got the elite troops with a little star on them. Are there any of those that I can easily see? I know there were some of those during sit-up. Here we go, out in French North Africa, the 5th Panzer Division has that little star. They're an elite unit. They get I think it's a positive dice roll modifier for being elite. There are also partisan units across the map. So you've got the Yugoslavian partisans here in Serbia. They basically create penalties for enemy forces. I did read the partisan rules. They don't have a zone of control. There are zones of control in this game. What do partisans do? When you want to, when you move, retreat, or trace supply through a partisan hex, you have to pay an extra initiative point. Yeah, they can't attack. Axis units can attack partisans. The partisans have a defense of 1. So they just become a little bit of a hassle. I've mentioned air units provide that superiority, naval units, things like that. There are beachheads which come out, so you notice all these beach closed markers down here, but there's some open beaches where beachheads can be placed for an invasion. Maximum of 4 pips can go into those beachheads. Relatively limited sort of functionality around a beachhead. And yeah, look, that's the sort of fundamentals. I plan very soon to start playing this, and then I'll do some examples of play to sort of demonstrate how this all plays out. And I'll try and capture some of the quirky actions and action markers and event cards and things like that that you may see over the course of the game. But as you can see, as I was hoping to convey, there's a lot of these kind of different issues that partisans, the air units, naval units, naval transport, the strategic boxes, all coming together in a really fascinating looking game. And I want to try and capture that through this video. All right, that's about it for this. Hopefully that's given you a sense of a bit of an overview, and yeah, we'll move on to gameplay very soon. Thanks all, take care.